Passive House is a performance-based philosophy and certification focused on designing and constructing better buildings that require dramatically less energy use for space heating and cooling. The short film that we're going to be filming here today is In Pursuit of Passive House, and it follows the construction of the first net zero passive house built in the Greater Tetons-Yellowstone region near Jackson, Wyoming. While explaining the passive house building approach for designing and constructing sustainable buildings and exploring the many associated climate and energy performance benefits for addressing the climate crisis. Before we get started, we always do a shout out to one of our members, and so I want you to join us in welcoming our newest board of director, Megan Cruz, class of 2024 to 2026. Megan is a residential real estate agent, farmer florist, and marketing professional for Doyle Homes in Howell, Michigan. Megan also recently released an article for us on the importance of neurodivergent home design, which you can check out on our website blog. You can learn more about ways to get involved with the Green Home Institute over at greenhomeinstitute.org/get involved. And before we get started, a huge thanks to our platinum sponsor, Rheem. Getting to Passive House is easy when you have energy efficient air source heat pump water heaters that are at least 300% or more energy efficiency. The Rheem ProTerra offers a 240 volt hybrid heat pump water heater, which works by taking heat out of the air to heat water at 400% efficiency and ensures a constant flow of hot water. They also have a 120 volt system that can easily replace traditional gas-fired units without the need for expensive electrical upgrades. I've been using the Rheem heat pump now for at least 5 years, and I have constant hot water with lower carbon usage and no increase in utility bills. You can check them out over at greenhomeinstitute.org/RheemHPWH. All right. Welcome everyone to In Pursuit of Passive House. This is going to be a film screening with a Q&A afterwards. This course is brought to you by the Green Home Institute. The Green Home Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. Today, I will be your moderator. My name is Brett Little. I am the education manager here. Like all our courses, this course is approved for multiple continuing education units, including 3 of the 5 pillars of green in our certified green home professional designation. AIA Health, Welfare, and Safety may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. So with that, let's sit back, maybe grab some popcorn or something to munch on, and let's roll the film, and then we'll get into the Q&A from there.
Climate crisis is a result of humankind essentially polluting the atmosphere with greenhouse gases from burning of fossil fuels over the past 150 years. That has led to record-breaking heat extremes around the world, severe droughts, wildfires, extreme flooding episodes. The time frame for addressing the climate crisis is here and now. We're already living on borrowed time.
Passive House is a system that started in Germany, and what it means is that we are optimizing all of the systems from the thickness of the walls, the quality of the windows, the orientation of the building, the air tightness of the whole envelope. The ultimate goal being building homes that just don't require a lot of energy to operate.
Love Schack is approaching this project based on our principles of environmentally friendly, ecological construction and reducing carbon footprint.
So the building in Wilson, Wyoming is really interesting for a number of different reasons. I think the architects and the owner and the builders have all kind of worked together to understand both the architectural design side of this as well as kind of the building science side.
We explained that in order to qualify our contractor, we would require that person to go get some training. The homeowner A pretty incredible person and said, well, what if we brought that training to our builder? And what if we not only trained him, but we trained his crew? And what if we trained and invited our building code officials, our city council members, anybody that wants to come, that wants to understand about better building science? What if we did that?
Here in the Teton region, there's someone who's doing a project of his own for his own passive house and really saw education as the pathway to making that happen. And what's really important about that is that in order for any of these projects to happen, you really need to have an ecosystem of professionals that know what they're doing and are all starting on the same page. We have probably about 15 builders here today learning about the passive standard, so it's like building to code. It's just that you're building to this higher standard.
So if you look at the bigger picture and making housing affordable, making the total cost of ownership low for people that are going to own their buildings, and at the same time making something that is going to do an impact in a positive way for the environment. The philosophy that we follow here is buildings are for people. The passive standard has been used for over 25 years. It's proven in the field in different countries of the world, different climate zones. It works, and we see a lot of people that are interested in just doing the right thing, whether they are the homeowners or the builders.
Even over the years of building to the standards that I've been trained to and the industry has had out there and the codes have been saying we have to build to, we're still finding problems. We're still finding problems of mold, air infiltration, and durability. So it's been intriguing for myself and my crew, and we've learned a lot.
If we look at what the climate models are suggesting for the Teton, Wyoming area, it is more of the same, more of these extreme events. And so we are sort of on this path for the worst case scenario. The best case scenario would be backing off on our input of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and what we call bending the curve, actually then reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and then reverting to our weather and climate patterns of decades ago.
It's generally considered that buildings between their construction and operation are responsible for about 40% of the CO2 that is generated on an annual basis. The solutions are the ones that you see every day, really. They have to do with where does the electricity come from? It has to do with transportation, mobility. It has to do with buildings. So all of those things are the main pieces of the pie that creates our energy problems today.
The site where we're building is really, really special. The Greater Yellowstone ecosystem is one of the most temperate ecosystems in North America. We have to be really responsible not only to wildlife, but to the whole ecosystem of what is there. And what would be the goals of a structure like that, and could we reach them in a place like Wilson, Wyoming, where we're in one of the most challenging climate zones of America?
We are using a very new material called cross-laminated timber for both framing and finish. Sometimes we like to incorporate, where we can, materials that connect us back to nature.
Cross-laminated timbers, I have not worked with them before. They mill them and they glue them together so they are one solid piece of wood. And then the windows are cut in, the doors are cut in. Now the fun begins and we start screwing them together.
Because this is a panelized system, the walls went up very quickly.
We were fully enclosed in 8 working days, and because there's adhesive in the lands, it already sets itself up well for sealing. So once you get this whole diaphragm together, you're already at an air tightness that's superior to, say, a framed construction.
All these different rating systems are about how to understand how buildings affect the environment. How does the building affect the site? How does the building affect water use? How does the building interact with the landscape?
Part of the effort is to minimize combustion in the whole project. So I think the client's going to understand that we're not doing a lot of toxic activities inside the space, you know, like machine shop stuff, like toxic paints and stains, welding. The heating systems that are going on that are exposed have very small loads. And because we're already within the threshold of passive house, it's just like easy, no-brainer, we're meeting our standard there. And then ultimately what that all leads to is like, this is still a really low energy building.
These are all our plumbing. We got our recirc going on in here, lighting in here. So this is being dropped a lot further. I have this plan to be dropped in wood. I mean, so this is what has to go up behind that bookcase with two of these. So anywhere there's a living space, you've got fresh air coming in. Anywhere in the bathrooms or hallways, things like that, you've got exhaust air going out.
You want to have air that's consciously brought in to where it's needed and filtered and then also exhausted, but in a way that doesn't actually reduce all of that heat. So we want to basically be able to recover that heat using an ERV or energy recovery ventilation system.
So the insulation is happening on the outside. We're using a combination of some rigid mineral wool insulation, and then we're using a Gutex, which is a wood fiberboard insulation, which does have a negative carbon impact.
We're going to have an envelope that will be somewhere around 18 inches thick, which will give us, I believe, a total exterior envelope of an R60.
It's really exciting right now because the plastic's been coming off, more insulation is going on. As you can see behind us, there's a window in place.
One of the unique things about a lot of the glass that comes from Europe is it can be fine-tuned to the job site, so you can change things like the solar heat gain coefficient. So here being a cold climate, they want kind of the free heat from sun coming in, so they'll have a higher solar heat gain coefficient to let more of that UV energy into the house to heat it passively.
This garage door is unlike any other that we've ever designed. Not that we design a lot of garage doors,
Right.
but in this instance it was kind of critical to the success of the airtightness of the whole building.
Probably the most high performance garage door in the country or the continent. I don't know.
We needed a way to seal and insulate a 12-foot by 12-foot opening. Schweiss made the frame, which is basically a hanger door frame. And then Andy Olred, he built the panels that go on it so that we've got expanded styrene panels that sit on the outside, 6 inches of that. The Schweiss door allows it, the center straps here, to pull the door tight into our weather stripping so that it air seals it. It's a unique system. When the windows are all in and everything's taped, then we can do a blower door test, and that will be the true test of what the air leakage of this house is. The county requires a 3, and we are shooting for a 1 or less.
I focus on building science consulting and performance testing that goes along with it. Here today to test the air tightness of the building through blower door testing and look for air leakage with thermal imaging. For this building, right now it's looking at going for low energy building under the passive house standard, which is 1 air change per hour at 50 pascals or less. And then true passive house is going to be like 0.6 air changes per hour at less than 50 pascals. And so we're looking to be ideally under even the true passive house, but for sure under the low energy building at 1 air change per hour. So looking pretty good so far.
7.6. Yep.
right? We get a little bit of thermal bridging at the bottom, which is to be expected.
Green building has continued to get better and better over the years, and we've really recognized that it's not simply a matter of solar energy, it's actually a matter of its environmental impact for water, for air, and so forth. So it's really much bigger. And in the last 10 years, the issue of embodied carbon in building materials has come to the forefront. It's probably 10% of our overall emissions globally, and it's one which we can actually address quite easily. So the idea of being able to use building materials that have a lower embodied carbon content has become something which is required by the federal government and is becoming more commonly required at state levels as well.
So, results, 0.36 air changes per hour. So, very good.
That was way beyond what we expected.
Super tight. 0.6 is full passive house air tightness, and almost half of true passive house tightness, so it's awesome.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
Wow. So we got to give Steve the good news.
Good job, builders.
And tell them how good they did.
I know. We can't wait to tell Steve and Alex they did an awesome job.
Yeah.
Big good. Overhead door at 0.36 is bonkers. It's great.
It's great. Very good. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. We're pushing ourselves to not only create something that performs as an object and is beautiful, but also has a performance metric and an experience on the inside that is, tactile and that people really can attach to and believe in. But we hope that by having this project be an example, that we're going to show that not only is this possible, but it's within reach and it's appropriate.
In order to deal with the climate crisis, really at the heart of it is dealing with carbon. And so decarbonization means moving off of fossil fuels and turning to alternative energy sources, renewables, hydrogen, modular. Ultimately, we really want to bring that wedge of carbon dioxide consumption down to as close to zero as possible.
So there are a lot of benefits for the homeowner and for the investor. It's going to be less operating costs. It can be actually less expensive to build. It can be more durable, and it can have high health benefits in terms of having less sickness and better environmental quality for the occupants. Buildings are not that complicated. I would like everybody to know that you can go out there today and retrofit your building to become a zero energy building and help the climate in the process.
The primary purpose of pushing passive house is buildings can be so much better than what the minimum code compliance delivers today. This is the way to the future for construction.
The real future of building is going to be in an overlap where the passive standard is used as the kind of framework of a building code. And then we really make some efforts on the materials side to get to natural materials that are less intrusive on the environment as well.
We have to educate a culture that is based a lot on cost effectiveness. But it's not just the client, it really is the building industry and the building culture. In my opinion, we have to remain open to change and do what we can today so that we're building better houses for tomorrow.
All right. Well, thank you. And I'm going to invite Lindsay Schack now on if you're with us to jump in for some Q&A. Hey, Lindsay.
Hi there, Brett. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for screening this video for our audience and coming in just to talk. We love talking about Passive House and how we can make our homes more energy efficient and healthier. I was wondering on, this home now and where it stands after the construction and the video took place and into the what we call, right, the operation stage. Would you be able to talk a little bit about what's being experienced just as far as costs, right? Utility costs, right? Utility costs are soaring. They're just along with inflation, they're going up significantly. So do you know what's being experienced with a home like this if it's on track to, really be a low energy home?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, so this space is sort of a garage shop space with a guest unit apartment of 1,000 square feet above it. So it hasn't seen consistent occupancy until just this summer.
Okay.
So we're still in sort of our first 12 months of full data collection on all the actual utility costs, but I can provide some anecdotal information just about the user experience. And humidity and sound and acoustics,
Yeah.
also heat and cooling. And it honestly is performing really beautifully with very little additional energy needed. It's kind of doing the passive work of staying cool in the summer and warm in the winter without a lot of additional heat, especially when the sun comes out. Even though the largest windows are oriented to the north, we have a fair amount of western facing glass as well that's pretty unprotected. And so that tends to really heat up the space. And so, yeah, I don't have the numbers data to share for anyone today, but the experience has been that it uses a minimum amount of energy to just stay at a nice stasis for the occupant.
Yeah. So, and so you were mentioning, from a health standpoint, right? We think of passive solar as one example, not just as saving energy, but this ability to, have a biophilic connection. We talked about biophilia last week on the show, so it's kind of on our minds. But and of course, Passive House. There's actually a question here, and of course, Passive House is so tight, right? We make our buildings too tight, it can actually harm our health, right? Starting with CO2, right? We're just going to have high buildup of CO2, VOCs. So what is being experienced, I guess, just in the overall health and comfort, and how is that being handled? The specific question is here: how is the occupant being trained and educated to know what to do to manage air quality in a tight home like this?
Well, thankfully, it's actually been not too high tech for the occupant. And we do have some specific conditions given that we might have, attraction of irritants through the garage space downstairs, which it's still mostly used as an entertainment space, and not a lot of machinery or equipment is happening in there or paint. But that was largely why the garage door sort of turned out the way that it did. Is if people might understand, the Passive House standard is relative to the volume of air that you have in a space and the amount of energy you're using every year. And so this is a pretty small building relative to Passive House standard. It's about 3,000 square feet, but broken up into these 1/3, 2/3 volumes that are connected through their ventilation. But that meant that we had to balance all of it. And so we found that we can control the isolation between the spaces while still balancing the air and providing comfort. Also, there's just recently, just in the last week, there's been a pretty terrible smoke event in the Teton Valley and the Jackson Hole Valley, really severe. And so we were able to check in with our owner and find out how the living space was doing. And it was doing its work, where it was filtering the air. We weren't having bad side effects inside the building, and there wasn't sort of any kind of smoke damage. The smoke was getting bad enough that on a very leaky building, you could end up, just like you would on your clothes or your hair, the need to clean out smoke damage from interior spaces. And we found that this space wasn't having any of those issues. The smoke balance, like managing smoke events, you're not on fire, but you are privy to regional smoke, is something that I think our clients have started to pay a lot more attention to. And Passive House delivers on that.
Yeah. So you're saying couldn't notice it. Did they have any PM 2.5 monitors to actually verify the reduction in the air quality in there, or is it just more of yeah, we're not sensing the smoke coming in.
Right now we don't have any monitors that are giving us any readout from the owner side. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's pretty low tech in the building just because
Right.
it's a guest house and a shop space, right?
Yeah, sure.
The experience is showing us that they're having a much better experience. But it would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
great to have that kind of monitoring. We definitely support it.
Yeah. So obviously Passive House, a fantastic standard. We talk about the 5 pillars of green here, a lot of GHI, energy, health, water, materials in place. Passive House clearly focused on energy, depending on which version of Passive House you're looking at. Starting, of course, getting into health a little bit on the air quality side, materials, even the newer versions under the DOE Zero Energy Ready program, looking at water. So on that note, was other residential green building certifications from a holistic sustainability standpoint considered, or were there other aspects that were done that are outside of the Passive House realm that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. I think one thing that's really important to us as a company and a culture is that we're trying to get to that low energy standard, but do it with as natural materials as we can.
Right.
And so that means really pushing for building assembly materials that had been pretty non-conventional for our area. And we don't win all those battles, but we won quite a few on this particular project in order to push for wood fiber insulation. And that's a whole other thing. Again, that was at the time it was imported. Now we're lucky that we can source it stateside. And many of the other systems, inclusive, we had some compromises to make in terms of what we did below grade and subgrade, but also just getting everyone to agree to the air tightness standard and understanding, the actual R values we were going to have to get to, and the window details to make the windows perform the best that they could. All of those were sort of stretches in assembly. And so I realize your question is about certifications. And so once we get to the low energy, then we realize we could probably hit a low carbon certification through Living Futures Institute. And so we started that path, and as well as Passive House being a crosswalk for that. So we're already, really paying attention to materials and their impacts in our assemblies. And so I feel like we're looking at it at a pretty granular detail. And then I'm trying to figure out how does that relate to the certification bodies that could be sought after. And this project has just been completed in the last year. So we're still sort of getting to the pivot point of being able to do that work. But I really am hopeful that we can certify as a low carbon building.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's start jumping into some audience questions here real quick. And before we do, just a quick reminder to all of you that yes, this session is being recorded, and we will have it available for you to rewatch, share, catch anything you missed on our YouTube channel. You can head over there now, click subscribe if you want. You'll get an instant update. Otherwise, check there in the next week and you'll receive an update. And as those questions are coming in, a quick reminder for those of you watching this in the future, not right now, but on demand, take your quiz with an 80% passing rate. You'll receive your certificate. For those of you who are here today, make sure that you're logged in appropriately with the name you want printed on your certificate. Take the survey that pops up, especially if you need AIA or SARA CUs. And then check your spam over the next couple days here at certs@gutenbergcerts.com. You'll receive your continuing ed certificate for your attendance. And as those questions are coming in, as always, a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, our executive director, Jose Reyna, our nearly 400 members. We're almost there. I hope some of you out there can help us get there by the end of the year. And our top tier sponsors who are allowing projects like this to hit Passive House, to get to net zero, such as Rheem, Mitsubishi, Serve with Build Equinox with their smart ventilation system, Panasonic, and all of them. Huge thanks for their support. So there's clearly a lot of questions coming in here, which isn't surprising on, what are the costs? And so I always kind of want to invite people to answer that question however you want, but in a way that, you're almost maybe compared to code, if you think about it, right? So and code is different all across this country. And so that's another issue. You're probably thinking, your code is going to be different than California, not too far away, right? Or our code in Michigan is pretty strong. But just in that context of, what does it really cost to do this? Is it all, materials cost? Is it labor? Is it both? I mean, however you want to answer it, but just, obviously, we're not expecting someone to say, yeah, it's $400 a square foot. There you go. See you later. Unless you know that. But, can you speak to us a little bit about what costs are for these kinds of things?
Yeah, totally. And it's a question that comes up all the time. And I'll just preface that, like, this is in Wilson, Wyoming, which is one of the most expensive markets in the country right now for building. And maybe it's similar, I guess, to Alaska, where again, labor shortage, hard to get materials, really extreme environment. So our snow loads, our seismic loads, all these things are more robust. And so assemblies, we have to do more structurally even. But this project comes in at about $1,000 a square foot. And if you can believe that was, those years are 3+ years old, probably. So it would cost more today, and $1,000 a square foot is nearly the floor for, say, custom residential design in the area, which might be shocking to some, but it's a super expensive place to be building anyway, which kind of made the opening for the project in the first place, because we said, well, we can apply, you know, systems that are going to make it so efficient to operate that even at this price point, you can get a better value, better resiliency, better durability, better independence for your project. And so the economics actually really made the argument to the client in a really effective way. But on the flip side, at the same time, we were building a much more modest, in the assembly types, and I can get to that in a second, but a much more conventional, modest assembly type in Bozeman, a single family home that was, you know, over 3,000 square feet, more of a typical size. And at that time, finished in 2019, that was finished for about $260 a square foot. So really, the price jump was from, it's a small house and a CLT package. And I think we all understand that the cost effectiveness of CLT is at a much larger scale. But the client really wanted the aesthetic, right? We were allowed to experiment with material. It gave us all these other really good qualities of airtightness, of sustainability, of low carbon in the assembly. And so we were able to do that. But the message is not that we think that, you know, all buildings should follow this assembly type. The assembly type in this project are very interesting, but we will probably never build this building again, not in this way, right? But we were able to show in a place where hitting these R values and airtightness and using these materials hadn't been combined before, and we had the opportunity to show how it worked really well. And ultimately, it's proven out, right, by the finished project. And so we're really proud of that. But we know a lot about these assemblies and materials, but I think in most of our projects, we tend toward a more conventional assembly and a lower cost assembly.
And so, on that note, you know, one of the questions that came in, and maybe you can speak on behalf of the builder here, but a little bit, but, you know, the question kind of was, what were some of the challenges with achieving that air tightness? And maybe I can take that question further with just, you know, like, I know exterior rigid is never anyone's favorite to do. So just some of the requirements of the air sealing and insulation, and was the builder experienced with that, or, you know, what kind of challenges did they have to face on that?
Yes, and I mean, this was a big reason why we had everybody take a workshop before we went out there and built, because there was a certain amount of education that would be really helpful in their confidence level and sort of knowing what question to ask, what to look for, because that's part of the battle, is even knowing, you know, what you don't know when it comes to house details. So I think again, the CLT actually sets itself up really nicely for air sealing, because you get so much of a field of wall space or floor space or ceiling space that already brings a certain level of air tightness once you deal with any of the openings you've created in the seams. And so those seams and openings and window details are probably the biggest challenge, because we had to build, you might have noticed in the film, there's a pretty substantial window buck all the way around the panel. And that was about getting the windows in the plane we needed them, because outboard, outside of CLT, we had a pretty vast depth of wood fiber insulation. And that the insulation itself has an interesting story about coming about, but in order to get to our full R value that we needed and to expose the CLT on the inside, this is the assembly that we chose. And when we brought this assembly to our structural engineers, they first came back and said, we want you to put parallel cord trusses outside of the CLT on layout to support the insulation. And we had to explain, well, gosh, the insulation is actually self-supporting. They had just never worked with wood fiber insulation before, right? So it took time for them to even understand how this material would perform, so that we didn't end up with a really over-designed structural system. And ultimately, we were able to secure that insulation with really, really long fasteners. But the assembly ultimately did come all the way together, being very robust and, you know, really thick. But so it was challenging for the contractor in lots of ways. And there were a lot of layers where they had to carry that air tightness through. So really it came down to door and window installation. And that very particular window detail, that being closer to the center of the assembly, which happened to be actually outside of the structural plane of the CLT.
Right.
So we didn't make their jobs easy at all.
No. Um, and again, kind of the same question, I think, for the mechanical contractor. You know, the specific question here was, uh, can you elaborate again on what the mechanical heating source was? But I'll take that further, you know, just again, what were some of the challenges, you know, for the HVAC contractor? I know a lot of times there's additional design, there's additional commissioning requirements. You know, what were some of their thoughts on doing system? Was it normal for them? So.
Yeah, I could probably talk for an hour just about the odyssey of mechanicals on this project, but I'll try and do my best. And we did use an ERV, and it's working really well. But I think honestly, there was maybe, again, this project helped a lot of people learn, and a lot of people have experience with new products and systems that they were very new to them. So we had a couple of rounds of getting it installed correctly, and also there was a ton of doubt among, even though our designer said, and our product manufacturer said these products will work, even our local installers are saying there's no way that's going to work outside in our cold at -30 for several days in a row in Jackson, right? And so there was a lot of challenges to getting it installed and then commissioning it correctly and finding out the actual issue where it was, because people just had, it was almost like we had a lot of people in the team that had like 80% of the view of the whole system, and nobody kind of had 100%.
Right.
I think it's something for designers and contractors to really be on the lookout for, is when that can happen. Because we're not all experts on everything, right? And so we did ultimately get a very successful ERV installed, working, and then fan coil units, heat pump for heat inside. We have one upstairs and one downstairs. And they work really well. And we have an additional layer of heating that's over those big windows and doors, and I don't believe so far that they've been necessary or needed in the use of the building. But of course, in design, it felt like it was prudent to put those in. So we're still learning about the right level of like how to wash warm air over these windows and how to, you know, and actually balance everything inside a small space like this. So there was definitely a learning curve that happened, but ultimately the systems are there now, and they're not being used as much as they thought they would be needed.
Sorry, help me understand. You said you had one up, one down, and then an additional layer. You're talking about these mini splits and backup. Is that what you mean? The ductless air source heat pumps? So you had 4 then, 2 are backup, or what did I was trying to understand better?
So there's a mini split upstairs and a mini split downstairs.
Okay. And what was the backup system you have in place?
There's some electric.
Oh, the baseboard. Yeah. Okay. And are these cold climate systems?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, I figured as much. So,
I mean, it was a big battle, right? Because what we're trying to do is limit the amount of energy we're going to be using.
Yeah.
But those are things that sometimes we just had to sort of say, all right, well, you know, for some owners, that might have become a big stopping point of having to install a system that they didn't think they were going to need.
Right.
Just to get through the process. So there were tons of challenges like that.
And I forget, you know, if your climate over there is more humid or not.
It's
but
very
I know
dry. So we're
very dry. Okay. So maybe not as much of a worry. I know with mini splits, their ability to remove moisture has sometimes been a little concern. I didn't know if you thought through that or not, or had dehumidifiers in, but you may not need them. So yeah.
Yeah. Although we do have, you know, that effect. We're just having it this fall, where like if it's humid outside, like if there's a pond out there, if they're like, you know, watering a lot, like you can get condensation on the outside of these windows because they're big diurnal shifts where it's, you know, there's frost in the pre-dawn hours and we're getting to 80 degrees in sun in the afternoon. We have huge diurnal shifts this time of year. So that's something also to educate our clients about.
Yeah, we're getting a little of that weather here right now, which is not normal for us in Michigan. So, another question. Well, first of all, there are a bunch of requests if you all would release the materials that you've used in full detail. So I'll let you know, I'll send over those and you can handle how you want to respond to that. Obviously, we're not going to list off a big list, but people are asking. But, you know, more than that, I think with that question on materials, there are some questions about this embodied carbon. And you said, you know, you want to look at this project from the lens of that upfront energy, that embodied carbon, the carbon that goes in upfront. And I guess then my question on that is, I know sometimes you have these trade-offs, right, of lower carbon in the materials but not as good performance as far as efficiency. Did you find that you had to have a conversation about a trade-off where you might lose operational energy savings to get better embodied carbon, or the other way around? Did that come up at all?
I mean, I think it comes up more often on larger homes that we do. On
Yeah.
this particular project, we were really able to optimize for low energy and low carbon together. And again, I think the effect of that is higher cost oftentimes, right? Where we can optimize lower energy systems, but also in the lowest carbon materials we can source, which means importing things, which means, you know, even the best energy or the best windows that we could source that gave us the performance we wanted, you know, were imported. They were a large line item on the budget. So we do have those trade-offs all the time. And I would say in our projects that we're starting in our firm, we're starting every project with the focus of trying to get them to Passive House standard and trying to see how far we can get them within the realistic choices they have with their budget. But usually we can find lower carbon materials that perform just as well as a higher carbon material and are in the same price point. Especially when we start thinking about operational cost, right? And operational carbon and like if they're going to own this building, and realize most of our clients are owner operators. We're not really often hired by folks that are building something that they're going to immediately sell. So we can, again, make the argument for the operational costs of your building. So the trade-offs, I think, is how we're characterizing that. And also all the health benefits. So it's hard to come at like an economic, you know, unit price for health inside your building. But at least we're giving these options to our clients on the table.
Yeah. And there was someone who said, you know, they, as an architect, they were struggling to find the EPDs, the environmental product declaration. So first of all, are those something you're using to validate embodied carbon? And they're asking, do you have any advice on how to get good materials with that?
Well, there are a lot of really good resources out there. And I think, you know, everyone should take it seriously and go and seek out either a class at your local university. There are some great sources online, the Healthy Materials Institute. And also, I mean, your resource as well in terms of really great places to find out what others are using. And I think you have to look at the data and understand what it means. And then oftentimes we're promoting, you know, particular insulation types and trying to help people understand why these installations are better than others, and, you know, the impacts on our personal well-being and health, as well as the people that are installing them for us, and trying to weigh that against, you know, ultimately cost. And I think some of, you know, so I'm not going to necessarily name particular resources, I think, because I think they're out there, and I think sometimes it's hard to do the research, but you have to find something that's going to also speak to your whether it's your client, your contractor, whomever is the decision maker in this process. It's got to be a source that they're going to see as relevant and valid. And sometimes it can be your own expertise, and sometimes not. Like sometimes you can show them your existing work and projects and say, this is an efficient detail, this is a cost-effective detail, this detail works in this climate, and that's all you really need to do. And that's harder to do if you're just starting out in the space. But I always say, when it comes to talking about low carbon to clients, oftentimes these things are sort of, they have a relationship to also being healthier for you and better for the long term. And that's usually where we start talking about it, is ultimately you have this great opportunity to build a structure. How do we choose materials that are just going to mitigate these risks out of your space?
There was some questions in here about the garage and just about your choice not to isolate the garage from the rest of the house. And so then number one, is that true? And then second, you know, what did that mean for air sealing and insulation? So
yes. So like we call the garage door bunkers all the time. Again, I don't think this will happen in another project. So in Passive House, again, smaller structures, it's much more challenging to get them to the standard because your assemblies get kind of to an unreasonable point of R value and performance. And so I like to share the story because it is absolutely an example of how you can be naive about something and just go for it, right? And this is what you have to do to make it work, and we were able to do it. But you know, being aware that in colder climates than ours, like you've had, like, say, there's a big Subaru dealership up in Canada that was able to meet Passive House standard. And so I think we interpret that as like, okay, well, like we can design a door that will allow us to have this big opening and the air sealing will work. without, I think, fully recognizing how challenging that would be. But also we needed the volume of the garage so that all of our energy wasn't split over, say, just the 1,000 square foot guest unit apartment, right? So just in total transparency, we ended up designing saying, well, and at some point, that is typically the point in your project where you will say, we're not going to try and hit the standard. Like, this is kind of not worth all the effort or the funds, right, or the resources. And we had an opportunity here where we had a really interested client who was like, let's try and figure it out. What would it mean? What would it look like? Who can we engage? And we end up with more of like an airplane hangar, vacuum door on their garage, and they love it. They think it's great, and we were able to achieve it that way. So again, it's an interesting story. It is not a solution that I would necessarily say is sort of one that all the people listening should employ, but it made for an interesting part of the film.
And the other question was, somebody thought they had caught a green roof, and if that's true, did you have any any further information you can share on the decision about that? Because we aren't seeing those too often anymore in homes. So
right. Well, and so the geometry of the building is that this guest apartment is a little higher than the shop roof, and so you're going to see the shop roof. And so we had initially planned for it to just be either a PV or a metal finish. And then the client asked us, like, is there anything else we can do to make that look better? And so we proposed this shallow depth tray system with sedums growing in it. And they're kind of bright green in the spring and they turn red in the fall. And then if you need to get to the EPDM roof that is below it, you just pick up a tray and get to that spot. Right. So like, it's not the old school depth of soil with actual growing medium in it, but the plants are grown regionally just about 100 miles north, I think. And maybe they're closer in Montana. But so far they've been surviving, and we did have to add irrigation to that. So in order for it to be established and live, it is part of the overall irrigation system around the building. And so far it's working out really well.
So I know you had mentioned this project isn't, one of those projects that you're necessarily replicating, but the questions that came in were more like both really for you and I think the builder, and then also some specific questions as somebody saying, hey, how do I find and convince, as a designer, a local builder to do this? So the question is kind of maybe more like, what is replicatable about this, in the sense of your designs moving forward, in the sense of, hey, is this builder who learned all this information, are they going to take it and apply it on the next one? And, what is the motivating factor to get a builder to sign up for something like this? So just kind of tying in a couple of questions here. So,
well, I think the builder training was really foundational to the building happening, and the building happening in the way that it did. And we had prior to that training, we had done one previous builder training up in Bozeman, Montana, and that was also critical to getting our other project done. And what we realized is that we weren't going to be able to convince a builder during the building process to get there. Like, the builder needed to start the process knowing where they were going. And once we asked builders or our potential builder partners to go through this training, we had been through a training, and it comes with tons of humility, honestly, to say, we had to learn some stuff to be able to draw it this way and design it this way. Would you be willing to spend some time learning some stuff, and then we can go build this house together? And it completely changed the conversation of how we would approach a high performance building. It was no more, otherwise you were going to, on the weekly, on the daily, you're going to litigate the solution, because everyone comes at it from a different place. And the education piece at least kind of leveled the playing field, and then everyone understood how to get to the goal. So I just, for anyone trying to sort of quote unquote convince your builder, I did that for a couple of years. We all did. We did that for years, having coffees, having, meetings. And ultimately, when it came to building, it's really hard to ask a builder to do it in a completely new way and learn on the job and be successful. Like, that's a pretty high stress environment, I think, to put them in. And we didn't quite realize that, because I think most builders are not going to show up that way, right? They're going to show up in a way of like, we know how to build a building, just let us do it our way, right? And so we thought, well, like, if we can host and sponsor and facilitate the building, can we sort of leap over this challenge of mystery and get to the other side where everyone's like, oh, well, it's not actually that mysterious.
Yeah.
It's different materials, it's different sequencing, it's paying attention to some new things, and we can get there.
Yeah.
And especially in a really cold climate like Jackson Hole, like that was the other challenge. Like this is much easier to hit in some of our other climate zones, six or 5, right? Like we also had to have the budget to pay for the materials that were going to get us there in climate zone 7. So it definitely relates to cost as well. But I wouldn't spend a lot of time convincing. I would start getting a client who wants it, and then getting a builder who's ready to show up and get training and bring that service.
Yeah. And I think that last thing you said kind of half answers my question. And I'm curious, do you see, and maybe it's your builder or other builders you talk to, are they approaching this as a learning opportunity, or are they approaching it as oh, yes, sure, we'll go take training, and that's all going to be driving up the cost of the project even more? Because, I just wonder, I think, if you pay builders to go out and get trained, which I'm not arguing you should or shouldn't, I'm just taking a neutral approach that if they approach it from if you're trying to find builders, are you kind of trying to pre-screen them ahead of time, like builders who want to learn versus builders who are like, oh yeah, we'll do it, but all that is going to just crank the cost up and make the project nearly impossible.
So. I think I know what you're asking. Let me just clarify one thing. So we sponsored the trainings, but the builders paid their own way. And we paid for like our builder to go, and then we did have some scholarships available for
great
people. But the 3 different trainings we've hosted over 3 years, otherwise, those builders showed up and paid their own way. The other thing is they're not that expensive, considering we're talking about like a couple $1,000s. Again, there might be some travel involved, but this is definitely in the world of building costs, this is a pretty small amount of money. It is a cost in time. It's say 4 or 5
time. Yeah, that's what I mean. More
that's
of
not insignificant, right?
Yeah.
So it's a big lift. And then ultimately we got to the point where we said, if you would like to be on our short list for a high performance project, you need to come to us having had this training.
Right.
By the way, we're going to sponsor one in 3 months.
Yeah.
And maybe you would like to sign up for that. And we got, through our relationships, we got builders to sign up. So they were really realizing, then once they took it, right?
Yeah.
Then they were like, oh, again, I've not had a single builder come back and say they wasted their time or money.
Sure.
On training. So that's great, right? And I'm trying to not destroy my relationships with them by saying they should take this training. But I need them to kind of get on the bus, right? So that we can all talk about the same things. And then ultimately they make all of their assemblies better, and they bring that expertise. And like, oh, okay, I know how to make a house a bit tighter than code, right? All of these things help all of their projects. And so I think it's win-win all the way around. So I don't think that they're just sort of doing it and tacking it on just to get on our builder list or anything. I think they ultimately feel very empowered, I think, by the training.
Yeah. And then I guess the last quick question was, did you get any kind of grant funding or special incentives for a project like this? I know, like, for those of you out there, if you're doing the US version of Passive House, you have to do DOE Zero Energy Ready. So there's 45L, $5,000 tax credits, but that you can only get that tax credit if somebody is selling the house, which go talk to your tax person on that one. But or here in Michigan, we have our utility company. They're shelling out $20,000 for Passive House, but that's, so just in your experience, Lindsay, what are you seeing? Are there, funding sources that you used or seeing that can be used for this?
I wish I had funding sources that were trying to get people to build Passive House out in the Rocky Mountain West.
Yeah.
If anything, we've had the utility companies show up and support the trainings, or send their people to them, or just be aware of, like, I think we're going to be doing a tour actually at this project next week with some local officials. So we're just trying to use it again as a demonstration of what's possible out there. Again, this is a market where it's a lot of very expensive, very highly invested in, particularly dialed homes.
Yep.
And I think it's a market where all of these homes could be doing better. And that was the intent, is to try to open the doors of one and let people see what it is. And that was the intent behind the film too.
Yeah. Well, we are at our time, Lindsay, and I really appreciate you and Mike Banker here with Creative Fisher for coming in and playing the video and putting this great video together for everyone to watch. Where can, just as a reminder, people go to learn more about this project or learn more about your work?
Well, and I don't know if Mike, if he can hop on and say more about it. I do want to give a special shout out to Fisher Creative. They did a great job on the film. And Mike has been helping us speak about it and share about it. They've been doing some really awesome stuff lately. So we're really lucky to work with like a local Victor film company to get this quality film out. So thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I dropped, there's a YouTube link. I dropped it in both the Q&A and the chat earlier. So that it's available on our YouTube channel. And yeah, Fisher Creative is a media production company based out of the Tetons, but we do work nationally, internationally. And we do a lot of environmental stuff. So if anybody needs some environmental related films, we'd love to work with you. And our website is fishercreative.com.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. And Lindsay, you're at what? Where can people find more about you?
We're at loveshackarchitecture.com. We have offices in Bozeman, Montana, Driggs, Idaho, and you can find us on our socials too at Love Schack Architecture.
Yeah. All right. Well, Lindsay, Mike, thank you so much.
I guess you asked about assemblies earlier. There is some information in our Instagram about this assembly if you go back a bit, and I guess we're kind of putting together a push to share more about the details of these assemblies and the materials we use. But
cool.
And if anyone wants to email me, I can follow up with some more information about the assemblies.
Yeah, wonderful. All right. Well, Lindsay, Mike, thank you so much again for your time and doing this. And take care, everyone else. We will catch you on our show here next week. So goodbye.
Thank you.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.